The law of dependent arising, the secret to bondage and release. Sermon 17 by Bhikkhu K, Ñāṇananda. Narrated by Bhikkhu Candana. Pahankanwa Sermon number 199. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage be to the Fortunate One, the worthy, fully enlightened. Tanha dutiyo puriso digamadhana sangsarang ittha bhavanya tha bhavang sangsarang nati vattati. Etamadinavang nyatva tanha dukkhassa sambhavang vitatanho anādāno sato bhikkhu paribbaje. Dvāyatānupassana sutta, sutta Nibbāna. Dear listeners, worldlings undertake the unending journey of births and deaths in a mad pursuit that holds no gratification, revealed the Buddha. They do not realize the misery in the sansaric journey due to the foolish expectation of encountering contentment. Craving is the tempting force in hiding, which creates a false shadow of contentment. We hope to discuss the significance of craving, tanha, as relevant to the subject of Paṭicca Samuppāda, the law of dependent arising, taking the above two verses as the topic of the 17th discourse on Paṭicca Samuppāda, because they well demonstrate the worldling's sansaric journey with tanha as the partner. The two verses are found in the Dvāyatānupassana Sutta of the Sutta Nibbāna. We have explained to you the style of presentation in the sutta through several discourses on Paṭicca Samuppāda. It presents the different topics of the Dhamma one by one in a way conducive to contemplation as a duality. This is how the Buddha introduces the duality of craving. Monks, if someone inquires whether there could be another mode of contemplating dualities, you must reply in the affirmative. How is it possible? However much misery arises, all that is conditioned by craving. This is one mode of contemplation. With the complete detachment and cessation of craving, suffering ceases to arise. This is the second mode of contemplation. Monks, a monk who trains himself well in this duality of contemplation, applying strenuous effort to burn out the defilements, can hope to realize one of these two spiritual attainments, either arahanthood in this very life, or, in case any residue of grasping is left over, the stage of non-returner, anagami. At the end of this account, the Buddha recited the two verses selected as our topic. Tanha dutiyo puriso dhiga madhana sangsarang. The man wandering long with craving as his partner, ittha bhavanya tha bhavang sangsarang nati vattati, does not transcend this samsara, which is an alternation between thisness and otherwiseness. Next, he declares, Etamadinavang nyatva tanha dukkhassa sangbhavang. Seeing the evils of craving which generates misery, vitatanho anādāno sato bhikkhu paribbaje. Let the monk conduct himself mindfully, with craving dispelled and grasping abandoned. When discussing the topic craving, tanha, we must recall how Paṭicca Samuppāda deals with it. You all know the law of dependent arising with 12 links. Vedana paccaya tanha, tanha paccaya upādānaṃ. From feeling as condition arises craving. From craving as condition arises grasping. You have to remember right along the two links on either side of craving. Craving is sixfold in the Buddha's analysis in the Paṭicca Samuppāda Vibhanga Sutta of the Vibhanga Sangyutta in the Sangyutta Nikaya. They are based on the six sense objects, as craving for physical form, sound, smell, taste, physical contact, and mental objects. The most popular and the most heard of interpretation is found in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Those listeners who chant or listen to parittas know well that the Buddha, in the interpretation of the Four Noble Truths, analyzes the origin of suffering in relation to craving. We have often emphasized that statement for your benefit. Yāyang tanha pono bhavika nandiraga sahagata tatra tatra bhinandini seyat hidang kama tanha bhava tanha vibhava tanha. This craving is pono bhavika. It has the inherent nature of causing repeated births. Nandiraga sahagata delights in and attaches to lust. Tatra tatra bhinandini takes delight here and there. Those are the three characteristics of tanha. Then come the three types of craving: kama tanha, bhava tanha, and vibhava tanha. Kama tanha is craving for the five sense pleasures. Bhava tanha is, in short, the longing for the soul to continue forever, as the eternalists advocate. Vibhava tanha, on the other hand, is the craving to cease existence, as nihilists teach. This is how craving is classified in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Now I wish to introduce to you something that calls for serious thinking. The Buddha, in the Tithāyatana Sutta of the Tika Nipāta in the Anguttara Nikaya, proclaims these words: Katamang ca bhikkhave dukkha samudayang ariya satchang? Monks, what is the noble truth of the arising of suffering? Do you think it's craving? You are mistaken. The Buddha says it's the Paṭicca Samuppāda, consisting of 12 links. Avidya paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya viññānaṃ, viññāna paccaya nāmarūpaṃ, etc. This is sure to pose a problem to many. Are the Buddha's statements contradictory? In one place, he says suffering is conditioned by craving. In another place, it's Paṭicca Samuppāda with its 12 links. How do we clarify this? Why didn't the Buddha speak of craving in connection with suffering? It is simple logic that if there is a mother, a father has to be present somewhere. You all know that. Similarly, the Father is revealed through the Paṭicca Samuppāda Dhamma. I shall now explain it to you. In the earlier discourses on Paṭicca Samuppāda, I have repeatedly stressed the fact that the important point here is not avidya, but the interrelation between viññāna and nāmarupa. It is this interrelatedness of conditions that was referred to as the vortex. It's the central spot in the Paṭicca Samuppāda. Then what is avidya, or craving? I think it will be more lucid if I put it this way. In the blindness called ignorance, with the darkness of preparations, a process of groping takes place. During this groping, two things get caught within one's grip: consciousness and name and form, viññāna and nāmarupa. They have an interdependent relationship. But the worldlings, being unable to see this connection, always treat them as two. As a result, there arise greed, lobha, anger, dosa, delusion, moha, attachment, clashes, and deception, and many more problems. We have given many a simile to illustrate this situation, so it suffices to touch on them in brief. The simplest simile of the dog on the bridge appears in Nibbāna, the mind-stilled series. A dog walking across a bridge sees its own shadow in the water, and believing it to be another dog, will react by wagging its tail, or growling or staring inquisitively. That illustrates greed, anger, and delusion, lobha, dosa, moha. We have modernized it using an ancient Greek mythical story. It has appealed to many. Narcissus, the Greek youth, who had never seen his handsome face in a mirror, saw its reflection in a pond as he bent towards it. Assuming it to be a goddess in the water, he spent several days in a futile effort to hold her in his arms, and ultimately sacrificed his own life. He was not aware that it was his own reflection. We have brought out many more similes to show the misconception of duality. We hope you remember in the first discourse the game of draught between Ajit and Sumit, which terminated in utter confusion. In the same way, in the game of cricket that you know so well, the moment two teams are formed, the original interrelatedness is forgotten. Then there is the simile of the cinema. The worldlings are not capable of understanding this interdependent origin of things, due to its subtle nature. Venerable Sariputta has expertly demonstrated it using the simile of two bundles of reeds. Two bundles of reeds maintain their upright position, supported by each other. When one is pulled out of position, the other is bound to fall. Interdependent origination is exactly like that. They are not one, but neither are they two. We have to refer to a simile from folklore as the last resort in explaining this intrinsic relationship. If consciousness is questioned, "Who are you?" it would answer, "Please ask name and form." If Namarupa is questioned, "Who are you?" it would reply, "Please ask Vijnana." They are so closely interrelated. The worldlings cannot grasp this subtlety, and hence the division into two teams. It should be now clear that Vijnana and Namarupa are closely interdependent. Now see whether you can agree with me here. It's name and form that is divided into 6 sense spheres. They are activated by craving, tanha, to function as craving for physical form, craving for sound, craving for smell, and so on. I consciousness arises through I and physical form coming together. Forgetting this truth, the eye runs in pursuit of form, the ear in pursuit of sound. This apparent duality creates the deception of the 5 aggregates of grasping, instigated by lobha, greed, dosa, anger, and moha, delusion. This analysis may not correspond to what appears in certain books. Commentators attempt to find the root cause of ignorance, which I think is a futile attempt. Ignorance is the father. In other words, the duality of consciousness and name and form springs up through preparations in the background of ignorance. The worldlings pick it up as a duality. Craving begins to function from this point. The Buddha proves this in several places, such as the Samidhi Sutta, when he says, "Acchechi tanhang idha namarupe," cut off craving towards this name and form. It is this name and form that divides itself into 6 sense spheres. We think this explanation is sufficient, because there is no contradiction here. In certain places where the Buddha talks of the law of dependent arising, the noble truth of the arising of suffering is directly identified as the law of dependent arising. What we have been discussing is the background of craving. To put it in brief, what Paṭicca Samuppāda depicts is nothing more than the background of craving, which is ignorance. It changes into a vortex and conceals the interrelationship from the worldlings. The worldlings always live imprisoned between two ends, two extremes, which create attachments, friction, and illusion. The final result is suffering, or the weaving of the five aggregates of grasping. In the discourse on the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha specifically referred to craving as the noble truth of the arising of suffering. Even when talking of the cessation of suffering, he did not refer to ignorance. Tassayeva tanhaya asesa viraga nirodhochago patinisaggo mutti analayo. The total detachment and destruction of craving is called the cessation of suffering. At this point, one may ask, where is ignorance? In the earlier mentioned Tithayatana Sutta, the cessation of suffering is explained through the reverse order of the Paṭicca Samuppāda. Avijjayatveva asesa viraga nirodha sankhara nirodho. With the cessation of ignorance, each of the other links cease to be. In fact, the most detailed analysis of the noble truth of the arising of suffering is found in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta of the Digha Nikāya. Here, the Buddha exposes the place where tanha arises and where it remains hiding, in the following words: Sakopana isa tanha katha uppajjamana uppajjati katha nivisamana nivisati. This is presented in the form of a question. Before I proceed further, I want to point out to you that tanha is a feminine gender noun in Pali. It's useful to know this because the term mother is used in this context. Some suttas say tanha janeti purisang, craving gives birth to man. Craving is the mother. Sakopana esa tanha, if translated in conformity with the gender rules in ancient Pali grammar, though an accurate English translation is not possible, it would appear as follows: that this lass, craving, in taking birth, where will she take birth? Another important point, dear listeners, is the correct rendering of nivisamana into English. The idea of lying under, hiding, or creeping under is implied here. So let's take it as lying in hiding. Then the Buddha's question would be that this lass, craving, tanha, in taking birth, where will she take birth? In lying in hiding, where will she lie hiding? Now comes the Buddha's reply. Yang loke piyarupang satarupang ettesa tanha uppajjamana uppajjati ettha nivisamana nivisati. Please remember that piyarupa here means delightful in nature. Satarupa means agreeable in nature. Since this reference is to the place where birth takes place, whatever is delightful in appearance and agreeable in appearance, that is where craving takes birth and lies in hiding. Next, the Buddha proceeds to analyze this position. Kincha loke piyarupang satarupang. What is delightful and agreeable in this world? The answer consists of a long list, which begins with Chakhung loke piyarupang satvarupang ethesa tanha uppajjati etha nivisamana nivisati. The eye is delightful and agreeable in this world. Therein is craving born. Therein craving lies concealed. In this manner, the Buddha talks of the 6 internal sense spheres, the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. Then he proceeds to list the 6 external sense objects: physical form, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mental objects. I hope you can understand them, though I have listed them in brief. They are all delightful and agreeable to the worldling, so that craving takes birth in them and lies in hiding. That is not all. The 6-fold consciousness that arises due to contact between each pair, such as the eye consciousness, Chakku Vijñāna, the ear consciousness, Sota Vijñāna, and so on, are delightful and agreeable to the worldling. There too, craving arises and lies in hiding. Then the Buddha points out that the 6 sense contacts, eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, and mind contact, Chakhu, Sota, Ghana, Jivha, Kaya, and Mano Sampassa, are also delightful and agreeable, so that craving can arise and wait in hiding. So also, the 6 feelings generated through 6 sense contacts, Sampassaja Vedana, are also delightful and agreeable. Next comes Sanya, or perceptions, such as the perception of form, the perception of sound, the perception of smell, and so on. This is followed by the 6 intentions, Saṅcetana. Worldlings like to think of the intention of physical forms, sounds, smells, tastes, etc. as delightful and agreeable. There too craving arises and waits in hiding. Next comes an amazing statement from the Buddha. Rupatanha loke piyarupang satarupang ethesa tanha uppajjamana uppajjati. Worldlings are delighted by craving for physical form, rupa tanha. They are comforted by it. They are delighted by craving for physical form, craving for sound, craving for smells, craving for taste, craving for physical contact, and craving for mental objects. This reveals the unbelievable truth that there is craving within craving. Tanha within tanha. Tanha is born within itself and lies in hiding. Can you believe it? The next list is under vitakka, or reflection. Reflection on physical form. Rupa vitakka is enticing. So is investigation of form. Rupa vichara. The 10-fold analysis of craving with reference to its arising and lying in hiding is found in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta. Then the Buddha explains how the cessation of craving is brought about. I shall put it briefly to you. I am confident you can follow the entire procedure. Sakopane sa tanha katha pahiyamana pahiyati, katta nirujhamana nirujjati. Where does that tanha cease? Where does tanha get eliminated? Where craving arises, there it ceases. Yang loke piyarupang satarupang ithisa tanha pahiyamana pahiyati, etha nirujhamana nirujjati. A lengthy and descriptive analysis is given in this manner on the cessation of craving in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta. Let us now move on to the Majjhe Sutta in the Ekaka Nipāta of the Anguttara Nikāya. In our discussion on craving or tanha, This sutta is of great relevance to us. We have discussed it several times because we are compelled to draw on its content when talking of craving. You will remember it when I tell you its background. Once, when the Buddha was residing at Isipatana, Deer Park in Benares, a group of senior monks, after the midday meal, sat in conference in their conference hall. Their main topic was a verse from Metteyya Panha, a discourse of the Buddha. Yo bhante viditvana majhe manta nalippati tang brumi mahapurisoti sodha sibbanni machaga. Knowing the two ends, he who with wisdom refrains from attachment to the middle, I call him a great man, who transcends the seamstress in this world. Based on this verse, 4 questions were formulated. What is the first end? What is the second end? What is the middle? Who is the seamstress? 6 senior monks addressed the assembly and gave 6 different interpretations. The first interpreter presented his view as follows. The first end is contact, phassa. The second end is the arising of contact. The middle is the cessation of contact. The seamstress is craving. Here he explains how craving functions. Tanha hinang sibbati tassa tasseva bhavassa abhinibbattiya. Craving stitches him on to repeated births. That is why craving is called the seamstress. To state the other interpretations in brief, the second monk said, the first end is the past, the second end the future, and the middle is the present. The seamstress is craving. We too can agree with this argument, watching how our thoughts work, running between the past and the future. We are not even aware of the existence of a present. That's because craving keeps tying up the ends. The third interpretation suggests pleasant feelings as one end, painful feelings as the second end, the feelings that are neither pleasant nor painful as the middle, and the seamstress, of course, tanha, craving. Here too we are so engrossed in the two ends, we are hardly aware of feelings that are neither pleasant nor painful. In the fourth, name, nama, is one end. Form, rupa, is the other. In the middle is consciousness, vijnana. Here again, the seamstress is craving, who keeps stitching together the two ends. Name and form. What is the fifth interpretation? The internal sense spheres, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind constitute one end. The 6 external objects, physical form, sound, smell, taste, physical contact, and cognizable objects, form the other end. In the middle is consciousness. Craving, playing her role as the seamstress, ties up the two ends, ignoring the middle. The 6th and final interpretation gives the view of self, sakkaya, or the 5 aggregates of grasping as one end. The other end is the arising of the view of self, sakkaya samudaya, or the arising of the 5 aggregates. The middle is the cessation of the view of self. Craving is the seamstress in this 6th interpretation as well, who keeps tying up the knots every moment, taking care that the cessation of sakkaya ditthi and its arising is impossible. These interpretations give ample proof of the vicious activity of tanha, craving. We have occasionally used the sewing machine as a modern simile to explain the behavior of tanha. Each time the needle goes in, the thread of the shuttle ties a knot. Tying knots is a specific characteristic of craving. Tatra tatra bhinandini Nandiraga Sahagata are words that well demonstrate the function of the needle, piercing into the machine, tying a knot, and coming up and repeating the process. Majjhe Sutta well describes the ruthless behavior of craving. I would like to discuss this topic from yet another angle, using another expression in the same verse, since I am very particular that you understand it clearly. Tanha dutiyo puriso dhiga madhana sangsarang ithabhavanyatha bhavang sangsarang nati vattati. The true nature of this samsara is summarized as something found between thisness and otherwiseness. Let me explain it. Think of a being taking birth here from somewhere, let us say from the animal world. This baby, seeing things, hearing sounds around him, he develops the notion here, followed by the idea of thisness or ittabhava. From the moment thisness is established, it keeps changing into otherwiseness or anyathabhava. It is an amazing thing, the nature of bhava, becoming. What is called bhava is something that happens due to grasping. Whenever a being grasps, clings to, something, impermanence begins to function from that moment. Explaining this subtle point is no easy task. Try to comprehend it yourself. We have explained before that only subsequent to arising of a thing that it becomes otherwise. When something becomes a thing, from that point onwards it starts to change. I shall give a simile, though not a perfect one. Think of buying a toy from a toy shop for a little baby. Paying for it adds more value to it. What they have brought home has its own nature or thisness, ittabhava. The moment the little one breaks it, it changes into otherwiseness, anyathabhava. From then onwards, it begins to change. The notion of a thing with its particular characteristics is called mannyana. It means to assume something to be a thing with its own identity. From then onwards it begins to change. The Buddha, immediately after his enlightenment, has proclaimed as follows: Anyata bhavi bhavasatto loko bhavapareto bhavameva bhinandati. The worldling, attached to bhava, continues becoming, which has the nature of otherwiseness, and overcome by bhava, delights in it. It is the seamstress, craving, who instigates the worldling. For example, imagine you lost something. Craving would say, "Don't worry, there is another one beyond. Have it." It expresses what is implied by tatra tatra bhinandini tanha pono bhavika. Pono bhavika is not merely suggestive of the moment of death. It takes place every moment. Punabhava apparently means the next birth. But every moment something becomes a thing or a this. It keeps changing. Due to this change, it is discarded and another thing is grasped. Another thing is grasped. This grasping is done through craving, which lies in hiding. This process is referred to as tatra tatra bhinandini. The fact that the beings wander in samsara between thisness and otherwiseness. This happens not only from life to life and birth to birth, but also within a lifetime. This change is extremely subtle. I have given you these details to enable you to understand ittabhava and anyathabhava. There are several meaningful verses in the Tanha Vagga of the Dhammapada. that expand on this subject, but unfortunately the meanings of some verses are lost to us. Anyway, let us discuss one verse for our purpose. Tasinaya purakhata paja parisappanti sasova bādihito sangyojana sangasatta dukkhamupenti punappunang chiraya. Here is its meaning. Tasina is a synonym for tanha, craving. Tasinaya purakhata paja, the human race placed in the forefront by craving. Parisappanti sasova bādhito, like a rabbit entrapped in a snare. What happens to the humans? The commentary says, parisappanti means frightened. Frightened like a rabbit in a snare. This interpretation overlooks a very valuable implication referred to here. Why was the rabbit taken as simile? It can leap far. Think of a rabbit with its hind foot caught in a noose. Ignorant of the confronted plight, it leaps far. Then, realizing the perilous situation, it leaps in all directions, but is hopelessly caught. Similar is the noose of craving. Sangyojana sangasatta, stuck in the bond of sticky craving. Dukkhang upenti punappunang chiraya. Humans are gripped by suffering repeatedly for long. In short, unless one attains the stage of non-returner, even though born in Brahma world, one is destined to return here due to the trap of craving. This verse in the Dhammapada, which you are quite familiar with, emphasizes how strong the fetter of craving is. Yathapi mule anupaddave dalhe chinnopi rukkho punareva ruhati evampi tanhanusaye anuhate uppajjati dukkhamidang punappunang. Yathapi mule anupaddave dalhe, when the root is uninjured and firm, chinnopi rukkho punareva ruhati, even though the tree is cut down, grows again and again. Evampi tanhanusaye anuhate, similarly, as long as the latency of craving is not eliminated, uppajjati dukkhamidang punappunang, this suffering arises again and again. This verse reveals the strength of craving. It's not different from the plight of the rabbit. I'm not trying to include everything in this discourse. I am only trying to bring out the hidden meanings of these valuable verses, which have not been given their due. Now, let us look at another aspect of tanha as given in another sutta. We have explained how, conditioned by craving, grasping, upadana, arises. In some places, craving itself plays the role of grasping. I would like to cite an example from Kutuhalasala Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, which has been subjected to much criticism. To put it in brief, the Paribhājaka Vacchagutta visited the Buddha and made a critical comment. He said the 6 teachers, such as Purana Kassapa, Makkhali Gosala, and Ajitakesa Kambali, when their ordinary followers die, reveal their destinations, and also, when their spiritually developed disciples pass away, reveal their destinations as well. But the recluse Buddha reveals where ordinary followers are born, but is silent about the next birth of his disciples with the highest spiritual attainment. The Buddha only utters the phrase, Acchechi tanhang vavattayi sangyojanang samma mana bhisamaya antamakasi dukkhassa. Even the Buddhists of today do not know what Vacchagutta knew about the Buddha. This statement is about the emancipated person. Acchechi tanhang, cut off craving. Vavattayi sangyojanang, reversed the hooks of bonds. Samma mana bisamaya antamakasi dukkhassa, comprehending pride correctly, expelled suffering. That is what the Buddha says about the emancipated person after death. Vacchagutta, puzzled by this explanation, confesses his doubt, his confusion. The Buddha says he well understands Vacchagutta's confusion and explains his position as follows. Saupādānassa kvāhang vaccha uppatting panyapayemino anupādānassa. I disclose the birth of him who grasps, not of him who is detached. The Buddha then gives a simile. Vaccha, just as a fire, saupādāno jalati. Here, the fire is a saupādāno fire, which needs an explanation. Upādāna is used in Pali to mean fuel. A fire burns only when it grasps some form of fuel, such as wood. The Buddha here explains that a fire burns saupādāno only by grasping a fuel, no anupādānassa, not without a fuel. That is the simile of the fire. This simile prompts Vacchagutta to pose another question. Friend Gautama, if a flame, acchi, is carried far by the wind, what would you say is the fuel, upādāna? You can imagine a forest fire, where the wind could carry a flame to a tree far away. That is the simile here. The Buddha replies that the wind is the fuel. We refer to this as caught by the wind. The flame was definitely caught by the wind and carried afar. This reply instigates Vacchagutta to ask an unusual question. Friend Gautama, if a being lays down this body and enters a certain other body, what then would you point out as the fuel? This sutta words it as Anyatarang kayang anuppatto hoti. Anyatarang here means a certain. A being reaching, entering, a certain other body, lays down this body, means he gives up this body and reaches another. The Buddha specifically states that craving is the fuel in that situation. This shows how forceful the functioning of craving is. But unfortunately, dear listeners, due to misinterpretation of this simile and this paragraph, the modern readers understand this as antarabhava, a period of existence between death and next birth. We have often explained in our books that the theory of interim birth is unacceptable. How did this misconception come about? One reason is the misinterpretation of the simile. Here, Vacchagutta questions, not regarding the gap between two existences, but regarding the passage from one existence to the next. There is also a very intricate language problem visible here. In the process of the Buddha, word passing from one generation to the next generation, confusion regarding phrases and words occurred. Sometimes the version in one written copy differed from another. Those who profess the theory of antarabhava read anuppatto, which means reached, as anuppanno, which means not born. Anuppatto means the opposite of anuppanno. These theorizers explain their position thus. A being lays down the body. Did he enter the next birth? No, not yet. Anuppanno, not born. What is the grasping during this gap? That is their interpretation. But I have emphatically pointed out the special word, anyataraṃ, that occurs here. It means a certain. We use this adjective always with something existing, not with something non-existent. If we select something really existing and use the word anyang before it, it is correct. This is a very subtle point, but why go so far? It's clear that Vacca questions how one birth leads to another. These theorizers, imagining that there is a time gap between the two, have in the recent past continuously argued that an interim birth exists. They have not understood the suttas correctly. One thing is clear, however. The Buddha confirms that craving itself is the grasping at the moment of death. It can be proved with several examples. A synonym for craving is bhavanetti. Netti is a projection, a point that juts out. Bhavanetti, bent, is another term used. During a rainy season like this, somebody levels a strip of high ground, leaving a projection at the top. With a shower of rain, that projection would collapse. Similarly, the projection in continuous becoming is craving. Why so? Because there is a shortcoming, a possibility to collapse. Uno loko atitto tanhādaso. In this world, there is always a flaw, a shortcoming to be seen. Atitto, no contentment. Tanhādaso, a slave to craving. Uno loko atitto tanhādaso is a statement in the Rathapala Sutta. The worldlings always find shortcomings. Even a millionaire would complain he is short of something or the other. Atitto means never gratified. Tanhādaso means a slave to craving. In this sense, craving is called bhavanetti, because craving alone is sufficient to create continuous existence. Due to the presence of that projection, netti, one is bound to fall into existence somewhere. That itself explains why the Buddha referred to craving as grasping. This statement contains not one or two, but several important facts. Now, let us talk about the cessation of craving. The term used to describe Nibbāna on certain occasions is tanhakkhāyo. Tanhakkhāyo virago nirodho Nibbāna. The very ceasing of tanha is treated as Nibbāna. It's the very ceasing of tanha, craving. Many educated people are confused by this. They argue, if craving means wishing for something, wishing for Nibbāna is also craving. There is a sutta that offers a solution to this problem. When Venerable Ānanda was residing at Ghositarama in Kosambi, a certain bhikkhuni sent a man to say that she was seriously ill and wished to meet him. Venerable Ānanda accepted the invitation. As he was approaching the nunnery, she lay down on her bed fully covered with a hidden intention. Venerable Ānanda, seeing through this lowly behavior, delivered an effective discourse to suit the occasion. Thanks to the nun's unseemly plan, we are rewarded with a valuable discourse. Let us first listen to 4 statements which conveys the essence of the discourse. Ahara sambhuto ayang bhagini kayo. Aharang nissaya aharo pahatabbo. Tanha sambhuto ayang bhagini kayo. Tanhang nissaya tanha pahatabba. Mana sambhuto ayang bhagini kayo. Manang nissaya mano pahatabbo. Metuna sambhuto ayang bhagini kayo. me tunne ca se tugato vutto bhagavata. Then follows an analysis of each statement by Venerable Ānanda. First, let us understand their meanings. Ahara sambhuto ayang bhaginikayo. Sister, this body has arisen based on food. Aharang nissaya aharo pahatabbo. Food has to be eliminated through food. Tanha sambhuto ayang bhaginikayo. This body has arisen based on craving. Tanhang nissaya tanhang pahatabbo. Craving has to be eliminated through craving. This sounds rather contradictory. Then he says, Mana sambhuto ayang bhaginikayo. Sister, this body arises based on conceit. But conceit has to be eliminated through conceit. The final statement seems rather queer. Metuna sambhuto bhagini ayankayo. Sister, this body arises through sexual intercourse. Here, the phrase metunang nissaya does not occur. It says, metuneva se tugato. That bridge has to be pulled down. All relations have to be severed. That is the approach suggested with reference to sex. Now, Venerable Ānanda goes into detail, taking one statement at a time. Ahara sangbhuto ayang bhaginikayo. That can be understood easily. Food is essential. One cannot go into total starvation like the Nigantas. A monk partakes of food, contemplating as follows: Neva davaya, namadaya, namandanaya, etc. It is known as Jnana Sangvara, restraint through wisdom. One partakes of food, contemplating on food. It turns out to be meditation. We have time and again reminded you that eating is not a game, not a source of entertainment. It's merely for maintenance of the body, so that higher life could be fulfilled. Such a monk, says Venerable Ānanda, will eliminate food eventually. Next is Tanha Sangbhuto, which is rather difficult to grasp. Venerable Ānanda explains it as follows. A certain monk comes to know that a certain bhikkhu attained arahanthood through destruction of influxes. This monk thinks, when will I be able to become an arahant like that monk? A wish, a yearning arises in him. We admit that it is craving. But inspired by that wish, that yearning, he strives hard and becomes an arahant. Mana sambhuto is also somewhat similar. A certain monk comes to hear that a particular bhikkhu known to him had become an arahant. The monk's thoughts are given in a particular phrase. Kimanga pana ahang. Why can't I? It shows conceit. Perhaps this arahant monk was uneducated or belonged to a low caste. If he can, why can't I achieve it? Is an expression of conceit. But this conceit might pave the way to arahanthood. The fourth statement was handled very briefly, without explanation. Venerable Ānanda only said, Me thune ca se tu ghato vutto bhagavata. What he said about Methuna is not similar to what he said about the earlier three. He advocated the breaking off of all connections. Thoroughly embarrassed, the nun jumped off the bed, fell at the feet of Venerable Ānanda, and apologized for her disgraceful suggestion due to her foolishness and unwholesome thoughts. Through her foolishness and evil thoughts, we were rewarded with a useful sutta. Although we look at it positively, Certain Buddhist sects have taken undue advantage of it by misinterpreting the statement. The Tantrayana sect took it as Metunang Nissaya Metunang Pajahati. Metuna is abandoned through Metuna. These are indecent trends, not worth discussing. I am reminded of another incident centered around Venerable Ānanda, again at Gositarama in Kosambi, which sheds light on the same topic. One day, a Brahmin named Unnabha inquires of the Venerable Ānanda, "For what purpose do you practice celibacy, the higher life, under the ascetic Gautama?" Being a non-Buddhist, he questioned out of curiosity. Venerable Ānanda's reply was, "Chanda pahanatang." We practice the disciplines of higher life in order to dispel desire, chanda. The second question was, "Is there a path of discipline laid down to dispel desire?" The reply was purposely given with the intention of arousing more critical inquiry. Yes, the path is the four bases of success, Iddhipadas, desire, resolution, will, and investigation. Most probably you have heard of them. Chanda is described as Chanda Samadhi Padhana Sankhara Samannagatang Iddhipadang Bhaveti. Basing his effort on the contemplation of desire, a monk develops Iddhipada. It implies that desire can be eliminated by developing Iddhipada. It is a contradictory statement, inviting criticism. Naturally, the Brahmin retorted, "Chandeneva chandang pajahisatiti netang thanang vijjati." Desire is dispelled by desire itself is an impossibility. Venerable Ānanda gives a simple simile to clarify the situation. "Brahmin, do you admit that you had a desire to visit the monastery, but it vanished on arrival here?" "Yes, friend." "Do you admit you had some resolution to visit the monastery, but it vanished on arrival here?" "Yes, friend." "Do you admit you had the will to visit the monastery, but it vanished on arrival?" "Yes, friend." "Do you admit you had a sense of investigation when arriving at the monastery, but it vanished on arrival?" "Yes, friend." Similarly, Brahmin, a monk following the path of discipline with the support of the four Iddhipadas attains total destruction of desire, which is his goal. When the aspiration of a worldling is accomplished, more aspirations crop up. Goals in the life of a worldling are all created by craving. They help to multiply craving. But here, what is the goal? Nibbāna, which is a synonym for the elimination of craving, tanhakkayo. The effort directed towards the destruction of craving ends at achieving the goal. We have on earlier occasions given you various similes to clarify this point. Then the critics cannot say that the desire to attain Nibbāna is also desire. We have to face facts. Here we see the middle path in action. We have explained it in diverse ways, such as the simile of crossing a current. The fundamental characteristics of the middle path are pragmatism and relativity. Even what is harmful is not totally discarded, but utilized to achieve the goal. To give an example, the Nigantas gave up food altogether and even untied the knot of their robe. They walked about naked. The Buddha, with the experience he went through, always avoided the extremes. He introduced contemplation, through which the middle path was made a reality. Contemplation became an essential feature in it. Samsara, or continuous existence, is such that crossing the current of samsara calls for extreme caution. That is exactly why the Buddha resorted to the middle path. Tanhang nissaya tanha pahatabba is perfectly applicable in this context. Tanha, craving, is abandoned by means of craving. The difference lies there. With regard to worldly goals, when one is achieved, when one is realized, another crops up. But Nibbāna terminates everything. What is Nibbāna? It is not something like Siyadori's Nibbāna, Nibbāna of simple Simon. Tanhakkayo means the destruction of craving. In the Discourse on the Four Noble Truths, the arising of suffering is illustrated by tanha pono bhavika. Cessation of suffering was illustrated by tassayeva tanhaya asesa viraga nirodho chago patinisaggo mutti analayo. It speaks of nothing but the destruction of craving. At the same time, remember the question asked by Vacchagotta Paribhajaka. In talking of the birth of the emancipated person, the Buddha used the most appropriate term, Acchechi tanhang. He cut off craving. Vavattayi sangyojanang. Reversed the hooks of fetters, sangyojanas. These fetters are fixed one to the other like the railway compartments connected to one another by hooks. Reverse the hooks, and they are disconnected. Try to understand the fetters as similar. Hooks, or bonds of rebirth, are turned backwards. Another phrase that adds depth to this idea is samma mana bisamaya. It gives the reason for endless births. The final target is the destruction of mana, conceit. It is the final attack on Mara's asmimana, or conceit of self. In other words, the pride of self as I am is the subtle attachment to continuous becoming. Those who have read the Dhamma will know that after the attainment of anagami, non-returner, one is born in the Brahma world, because the conceit of self still remains. Concealed within the fivefold fetters, such as passion for worlds of form, passion for formless worlds, conceit, agitation, and ignorance, there is self-pride in a very subtle form. That too has to be eliminated. I have been trying to emphasize the significance of craving, which is treated as the mother. There seems to be some confusion regarding the connection between the Paṭicca Samuppāda and craving. That's why some people, like the Hindus, our Pali commentators, keep guessing what the root cause of ignorance is. It is an unnecessary attempt. Let us understand it this way. The groping that takes place in the darkness of ignorance is called Kaya Sankhara, Vachi Sankhara, and Mano Sankhara. That is the preparation of the body, speech, and the mind. In this process of preparation, there arises vijnana and namarupa, consciousness and name and form. These are the two forces we refer to as the vortex. The worldlings, unable to understand their interdependent nature, take a firm stand, mistakenly seeing something to grasp in the form of subject-object. This is what activates in upadana, or grasping. To facilitate better understanding of this position, let me recall the simile of the mirage, which I have often referred to. Imagine a row of posts fixed far apart on a flat land. The deer, imagining there is water, runs up to the first post, then up to the second and the third, and so on. This is the deception which we call tanha pono bhavika, or craving that leads to continuous existence. Craving is the force that pushes beings forward. All this should make you realize the depth of the Buddha's Dhamma. It is an amazingly rewarding Dhamma, if you have the correct vision of the goal. Many people understand Nibbāna to be another birth. When explaining the Paṭicca Samuppāda, we have emphasized that the specialty about the Dhamma is that one has to terminate the entire mass of suffering as the final goal. The attachment to continuous birth and the very notion of becoming has to be eliminated, or else it will persist even after the attainment of a non-returner, anagami. Such is the subtlety of the Dhamma. Now, dear listeners, I hope you will support your meditation with what I have explained, particularly in seeing the negative aspect of craving, as the Buddha has taught us. If you are aware of the conditions under which craving arises and ceases, you can definitely reach the spiritual attainment described as tanhakkayo virago nirodho nibbāna. I want you to put this discourse into practical use in improving your meditation and religious practices, so that you could attain the different stages of the path and the peace of Nibbāna in this very life. Whatever beings there be, from the lowest hell of Avicii to the highest Brahma world, Akanita, may they rejoice in this discourse, and may they attain the peace of Nibbāna. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.